So WLPC doesn't allow panels, so this isn't unpanel. But throughout all of the training and deep dive that I've been doing with migrations for WPA3 security, there have been a lot of friction points. And so throughout that, as I'm trying to understand why stuff's not working, I've been having messages with these guys separately and in group chats, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if you guys got to hear the questions and answers that you probably have as you're trying to plan these migrations directly from them, instead of me kind of packaging that and regurgitating it to you. So I asked Keith, could we do this? And he begrudgingly said yes. So here we are. So we're just going to talk through a few of the conversations, and this is kind of the flow. But if history is any indication, we're going to deviate from this a little bit. So I just kind of wanted to talk you guys through my thought process as we ask these guys here. So I was curious about sort of adoption trends and what everybody else is seeing, and then I wanted to get into the challenges. So when I've done these migrations, I never have 100% success with the endpoints. When I go from WPA2 security to WPA3, things fail. They usually fail on the personal networks with passphrase. So I wanted to understand why. And then we'll get into, we've talked about and heard about the impact of protected management frames where there's integrity, but some of the frames are also encrypted. And I wanted to understand what all was encrypted and then what all that was going to impact from a tooling perspective. And then I keep going around to, I know a lot of the clients I work with love using MPSK and PPSK to do their little micro-segmentation, and I feel like we just got to where that was sort of the easy new hotness, and now in WPA3, that's not really a straightforward thing to do, and another kind of technical behind-the-scenes thing where I keep asking Wes to please explain and re-explain this to me. So I thought you guys would think this was fun, so I'm going to jump into it. And I'm curious, I'm going to start with Wes being in the production area here and seeing all of the tenets that you get to see about adoption.
So yeah, WPA3 adoption, I think is, so when you look at the scheme of overall, how many clients, how many people are using WPA3, it's overall small compared to WPA2, just because there wasn't I don't think there hasn't been a driver for WPA3 until 6 gig. And so in general, overall adoption is low, but when you look at people who have turned on WPA3, WPA3 adoption in that case tends to be very high. So for 802.1x, WPA3 Enterprise, the percentage of clients connecting with WPA3 is like 99%, probably nearly 100%. And these clients, they support protected management frame, and to the client, often they don't really know that they're connecting WPA3 Enterprise, right? Because it's just a bit or two that's different. And so we've seen very good success with enabling WPA3 Enterprise or WPA3 Enterprise transition. You just kind of turn that on, and kind of discussed yesterday as well in some of the sessions that it's generally very good luck enabling that. WPA3 Personal is a little bit of a different story, and you're more likely to see interoperability issues with WPA3 Personal or SAE. However, I think it's generally small and specific device types like older IoT or even maybe some newer IoT, but your major device types are supporting WPA3, and so we've done some large-scale events with WPA3 transition SSIDs, and so we have a pretty good data set, which is, so if I look at 2021, WPA3 Enterprise, WPA3 Personal transition, the adoption was about 70 to 75% of clients connected with WPA3, 20-25% connected with WPA2, and a very small percentage didn't connect, which was like, there's some like Android 9 devices and some like first generation Microsoft Surface with some Marvell chip.
And so just to clarify, this is at an event where people are walking around with laptops and phones,
Yeah.
not in an office
Correct.
environment where there's weird stuff.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, this is an event. And so that was 2 years ago, encouraging. In November 2022, the client adoption was probably 90% WPA3, 10% WPA2. And then in June, it was 95% plus WPA3. So there's actually been a pretty quick uptick of WPA3, at least from what I've seen.
Okay. Do you guys have thoughts on adoption rates before we get into the tricky bits?
No.
So the next was then, okay, why are some of the things not working? Now, on the events where we're talking about laptops and phones, I think it's just obvious that if it's not connecting or it's choosing WPA2, it's because it's just an older device. It's not been updated to support WPA3. But what we've seen with some of the other things is there were these kind of maybe four times or places that an endpoint wouldn't work, and how it wouldn't work and what it wouldn't work on varied. So I'm going to just kind of run down here and then let you guys talk about this. So I'm actually going to start at the bottom here. So some of the devices, even if they support WPA3 and or transition mode, they still require manual intervention. You may still need to touch it and disconnect it and reconnect it from the network, especially for personal networks. Even if nothing else changed, some of the endpoints are a little too smart. They know that something changed. And I have your screenshot and your screenshot coming up. We have the endpoints that are unable to do WPA3 just because maybe they haven't been updated. And then that third one up from the bottom is related to the top one, but sometimes the endpoints see AKMs that they don't understand, or they don't like multiple AKMs, which was one of the issues we saw with 11R adoption originally. So I wanted to let you guys talk through this because I think this is probably the most of where I've been asking these probing questions from you guys.
Want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. It is an issue. One of the big issues, I think, in adoption or a client being able to support WPA3 is actually, I'll start off with older clients that maybe don't support it, and you enable transition mode, so that transition mode effectively should allow your WPA3. This mic is a bit. Is that better? Perfect. Okay. So transition mode should allow your WPA3 clients to connect and your non-WPA3 clients to connect. That's the whole purpose of transition mode. But what we've been finding is those older devices that don't support it see the transition mode enabled and they just don't connect. Now, why do some not connect? It's because actually in the slide actually at the top shows the robust security network information element, and what it looks like when you enable transition mode. You'll actually see there's two authentication key management suites in there, and what that basically says is, hey, I support pre-shared key, WPA2. I also support simultaneous authentication of equals, WPA3, the replacement. And unfortunately, some clients, because they don't understand the SAE element in there, they just go, I don't understand it, I won't connect. Now, clients should, if they see something they don't know, ignore it. But they're not doing that.
Keep talking.
Okay, I'll keep talking. Brilliant. This is my personal adjuster. So that's obviously one of the issues we see there. But there's also another issue, I think, that happens when you do get a client that can support WPA3 as well, is some of them don't like seeing the two elements in there. They only expect to see one, and they see two, and they can't process it, and they just won't connect. But if you did it WPA3 only, it would connect. So they're two of the things that we've seen with some clients not liking what's in this information on it.
Reprogram the driver.
Yeah,
reprogram the driver.
It often needs, and sometimes that's all that it needs. It needs a new driver for the client,
Yeah,
and it can be fixed that
that's
way.
one of the challenges that if you want to fix it, it's pretty much go in there and update the driver. But I mean, these all devices, especially IoT, you'll never see an update coming out. So
And the other thing someone sees, you know, when you have a wireless profile stored in your computer, you've connected to a network before. It might well be that it's stored it and it stores a security type along with it. So if it's stored that it's a WPA2 network and you maybe it wants to say roam to 6 gigahertz, but that's not an option. It goes, oh, well, I can't connect because that doesn't match my security type. Even though I support WPA3, I'm not going to connect because that doesn't match the profile. You'd actually have to go and forget that network, reconnect for it to then connect.
So is it fair if something doesn't like the multiple AKMs, that top bubble up there, is it fair? So my understanding, not having sat through Peter's class, is that if we're advertising 11R or FT, that is a separate AKM, and it would also fail with that. Is that a fair, if we're falling into the first bubble?
Yeah, that can also cause it to fail. Yeah.
Okay.
If you any, you know, clients are meant to ignore things they don't understand in beacon frames. What we've learned is that many don't, and if they see something they don't understand, they don't support, they just won't connect.
Okay, and this is where I've had some frustration, so I'm curious on your thoughts. And Peter, you've mentioned, or I guess I asked about some of the conformance testing for endpoints, because the second bubble with the AKMs that a client doesn't understand, and the way I explain it in my deep dive is it's kind of like if you see a sign, if you're from the US and you don't speak any other languages, because we don't, and you see a sign that's in Russian or German, and then you see a sign that's in French, and you're American and you're going, I have no clue what's going on. But then you see the sign that's in English and you go, aha, I don't know what the other one said, but I understand this one. So that's good, I'm going to do this. But a misbehaving client looks at that, and even though they've seen something that they understand, they just go, well, I don't know what the other stuff is, so they don't even try to associate. And so I asked these guys, and Wes and Peter especially at first, I said, well, so that to me sounds like the endpoint's not behaving properly because I don't think it should be doing that. And then I asked Adrian, well, how can we test an endpoint? Because if we're in a production environment, I don't want to just go willy-nilly, especially on a passphrase network, where there's a bunch of random crap floating around there and I don't know where it is or whose it is or what it's doing. Just trying to upgrade it to WPA3 or even trying to put it on a transition mode is not going to end well. Are there ways to test it? So are there ways to verify or get the clients to be more conformant here? And then are there things we can do to test it?
yeah, so as part the WLPC team developed this tool called Profiler that we use to actually understand the capabilities of clients. So the idea here is that the profiler will create a fake SSID or access point that would advertise like it would be like the super AP. It has all the capabilities that you can imagine, everything. So the client, when it sees that AP and we try to connect to it, it will advertise what it would say, okay, you support that, I support this, and then they connect. So JJ asked us, can we use the profiler, to advertise an SSID that with transition mode enable, and we'll save clients, how clients behave. The problem here is that clients won't even try to connect, so the profiler doesn't even get an association request from the client, so we are unable to tell what the client it's telling us or it's supporting or whatever. So now we can say, okay, well, but it's failing to connect, so we can assume it's because of the transition mode, but we cannot be 100% sure that's the reason, because there are some clients, that, as Peter was saying, they're supposed to ignore what they don't understand, even with information elements. If there's an information element in the beacon that is new to them, they should just ignore it, but some drivers, they just, they won't do anything. So we cannot really tell 100% sure that if the client doesn't connect to the profiler SSID, it's because of transition mode. So I think the yeah, as of today, the only real way to test this is to get an AP, put it in transition mode, get the client, try to connect, and see if it works or not.
I think
Yeah.
they say test in production.
Pretty much.
But at least I feel like the profiler, I would rather have some information than no information.
Yeah.
But I would rather have no information than wrong information. Does that make sense? Right? Yeah. So I think like the profiler test at least would be an indicator that it would be likely to fail in production. Right? It's not a guarantee and you don't know exactly why it's failing, but at least it's a piece of information before you go just if you don't have the luxury of changing your
Yes,
production
because
network.
we can even have the profiler advertise WLPA2 only, try the client if it connects, and then WPA3, see how it behaves. I mean, if kind of understanding if it's because it's in multiple AKMs or if it's in just WPA3 in there, doesn't understand that. So
Yeah,
if-
so you basically, I think, have to do at least 4 tests, because you'd have to do
Yes.
a WPA2, a WPA3. One of those that was successful, you try that with maybe 11R, and then the transition mode.
Yes.
And you see where in there it breaks, and that will tell you
Yeah, and
maybe
then
why
we'll
it
have
broke.
some information, yeah, to go
Okay.
and test in a real environment, yeah.
So then I'm kind of feeling like, well, I feel like the endpoints just should do a better job, and we wouldn't have this problem.
I agree. I actually think it'd be really great to see in the future when endpoints are tested, maybe that there's actually some forward compatibility testing. So that, that's what I would really like to see from the industry, maybe from the Wi-Fi Alliance, that they actually start going, actually, let's put some dummy information elements in, some dummy security types, and say, does the client ignore it? We don't know what's coming in the future, but let's put some dummy information in there and just check that the clients ignore it. And then we know actually it's got some future proofing. I'd really like to see that happen.
So from a product management perspective, and maybe you know this or don't know this, if an endpoint goes through the Wi-Fi Alliance conformance testing, would this alleviate this problem? If we pulled from the list of tested endpoints, would we not have this problem in the second bubble? Supposedly.
Not necessarily. I don't think there's a WPA3 transition test case. Could be wrong. There's WPA3, there's WPA2, but I don't think there's transition.
So we're just screwed for right now. Okay. That's good. Yeah. All of the endpoint vendors are like, we don't care. Okay. So I'm going to move on from that. I did see one question. And we're not supposed to take questions, but we're not supposed to do panels anyway, so I'm just going to, let's see what's up here.
Sorry, it's great to use profiler when you know your end client, but if you don't know who is coming to connect to your network, how can you take the risk?
So I think that's a very valid question, which is if you already know what you have, you can test it, but if you don't know what might be coming, how do you test it? And that's very valid, but I'm kind of just interested in, we're now here where we have the stuff we know is connected, how especially on a passphrase network, how do we get that? Well, sorry, let me back up. The stuff on a passphrase network, if it's not a guest, if it's not being used for guests, is typically our IoT type of things. And so how do we get those safely to WPA3? Because, JJ's personal point of view, I love the security features of WPA3. They're huge. It's a huge leap over WPA2. It's ridiculous. But I don't think it makes sense to change several things at once. And if everybody is waiting until, well, I'm not using 6E right now, I'm not doing 7 right now, I don't have to do it right now, it's going to really suck later when you do need to do it or do want to do it, and then you have all of this back work to do. So I don't think, I mean, maybe Peter's idea of that, what did you call it?
Forward compatibility testing.
Forward compatibility testing would alleviate these first couple of bubbles so the new things coming in would work well, but I don't know that we have any tools for that at the moment.
I would say when you think about, okay, do I need to go to WPA3? I think the answer is yes. Not necessarily because of 6 gigahertz, but to JZ's point, there's tremendous improvements from a security perspective over WPA2. And so really you should be thinking about WPA3, like not even if you don't have 6 gig on your mind. And so because of that, there will be devices most likely, especially for the passphrase type networks that don't connect to WPA3. So in that case, you would want to think about a strategy of, okay, do I keep a WPA2 SSID, on a segregated VLAN that I can keep those devices on and potentially have as a fallback for those devices that can't get on.
I'm going to give a big amen to that one. I'm a huge fan of separate SSIDs for that purpose, and leave that WPA2 network there as long as you need to, and it might be several years. And I mean, that's not the ideal answer, but I think it's the best answer that we have. So do you have any last comments on that before I move into the tooling? Okay. So I was just curious, now that we know we have protected management frames, primarily the purpose of that is for integrity, to verify that the entity, like the AP or the endpoint that's sending the frame, is actually who it claims to be and can't be spoofed. But some of the frames are encrypted, and that seems to be in flux. It's changed a couple times just since I've been looking at this, but we have a list Peter pulled recently, and I said, okay, well, to me, a lot of the tools that we've used historically, and I don't have to do packet captures much now, I let that be somebody else's problem, or I go to these guys and ask for help, or I go to Sam or JD. But if we need to be able to capture over the air, and we've been using these third-party tools, and now some of the juicy stuff that we're using to troubleshoot is encrypted, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's, WPA3 does make tooling, it makes analysis, it makes troubleshooting harder. I think from which frames do I worry about losing for encryption? I get the most for it. It'll decrypt deauthentication frames, disassociation frames. I'm less worried about that because it encrypts after the MAC header, so I can see it's a deauth, I can see it's a deauthentication, I just can't see the reason code. So that's a little bit problematic, but actually, the other frames that get encrypted is a subset of the action frames, and it's quite a large amount of action frames that end up being encrypted. So all you're going to see is an action frame was sent, but you're going to have no idea what type of action frame it was. What was it doing? What was it? A channel switch announcement frame? Was it setting up a block acknowledgement? So, and those frames are actually really useful when doing troubleshooting, and we're not going to be able to decode them or see what they are. In fact, the screenshot here shows an encrypted action frame. The only thing we can tell about it is it's an action frame. We don't have any other idea.
I said we should give away an AP if somebody can reverse engineer this and to figure out what it was.
And sometimes you can. Sometimes you can look at the length, and if you and you also know when certain action frames are sent, you can make an educated guess what it is. But you need to know your protocol pretty in depth for that. So I think I'll tell you what I think the solution is to this. The solution is not doing over-the-air packet capture. It's we're going to need to rely on our infrastructure vendors to provide us packet captures. If you think about, and this isn't just for WPA, this is multi-user packets are really hard to capture over the air as well. So actually, where do I need to get my packet capture from? Actually, the one device that knows everything is the AP. So we need the access point to be able to give us unencrypted packet captures, because they can. They could give us, we could capture the packet before they encrypt it, when they send in, and after they've decrypted it. And that, I think, has got to be the source from.
And I know you're teaching a deep dive on that next to me in the room, and I know that you're using Juniper stuff for that, so I'm assuming Juniper supports that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to mention, if the answer to this is no, I don't want to mention specifics, but does everybody do it that way, or are we still figuring that out?
Not everyone. If you look at packet capture solutions for every vendor is different at the moment, and they all have some things they do well, some things maybe they do well. I am using Juniper in they do give you the unencrypted packets, which is really nice to see. So that's a real
We'll probably start to see that more broadly if it's not in the
yeah.
platform currently.
But yeah, I guess it's an opportunity for the access point vendors, I think, but my call really is that I think that's where we need to be getting our packet captures from. So, yeah.
And then I know, Adrian, you had an interesting example that I thought was relatively indicative of stuff I've seen with third parties doing validation.
Yes, so there's a case, ISPs in Latin America, so for some reason they love band steering. So one of the things they do before they put the equipment in the homes is that they have to do some tests on the equipment so they, to pass on the validation tests. So one of the things they actually do is test band steering, and with band steering you have these BSS transition request management frames, which are action frames. So what they usually do is that they would just take a phone, connect to the access point, walk around, and do a capture to see when the access point tells the client, okay, you should move to this other access point, so this other band. And normally with WPA2, you can, without protected management frames, we can see, okay, this is the action frame that corresponds to the BSS transition request. And this is the response, and this is the code, and yeah, it accepted the transition, it didn't accept the transition, and so on. So they use that information to validate the equipment. If the equipment is not working correctly, they just send that report to the vendor, and the vendor makes the adjustments, etc. With protected management frames, that's going to be a challenge because all those frames, or at least the transition request, is going to be encrypted. So it's going to be a challenge for them to test this, to continue making these validation tests. And unfortunately, unless you have, as Peter said, something that you can use to capture from the infrastructure, there is no way right now to decrypt an over-the-air capture. After you have done the capture, go to Wireshark encrypted. There is no way to do that with SAE at the moment.
Yeah, and I know that was one specific example, but I have a lot of friends who either have to manage third parties that go on site and they bring whatever tools, and they're doing all of their validation with over-the-air captures and tools with their little checklist of whatever. Might not be band steering, but some other configurations.
Yes. And it's not that the tool will stop working, it's just that the information there will be encrypted. Now, contrary to the name, protected management frames, it doesn't protect every management frame. There's still some visibility, like you can still do scanning and see the network, see the beacons, everything. It's just, certain pieces of information that are valuable while troubleshooting that will represent a challenge in these real-world cases.
Thank you for that. So then my next hop was back to Wes, because I have been asking about MPSK and WPA3. So I've had this conversation with Stephen Orr repeatedly, and it's something I've been trying to wrap my head around. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Why are we not doing it yet? And you guys aren't doing it yet, so I thought you've probably evaluated some options and you have some insight into this, and we only have a tiny sliver of time left, but I'm going to let you tackle this one quickly.
Yeah, so WPA3 and multiple pre-shared keys, this is a luxury that we enjoyed in WPA2, where because of the weaknesses of WPA2, we're able to essentially do multiple passphrases in WPA2. WPA3, by definition of SAE, has addressed those weaknesses, and so the multiple passphrase world is more difficult in WPA3. So the MAC-based WPA3, where you're tying a MAC address to a passphrase, is pretty easy. I think there's multiple vendors out there that support it. We're adding it in the next week or two. So that's pretty easy, but when you think of this like Mac-less, which is like, okay, I have my device, I just connect, I don't have to pre-register it, that is more challenging. And some of the mechanisms that exist in WPA2 don't exist in WPA3. So potentially one thought is you make the client connect to WPA2, which may not be great. or maybe you look at OWE or some other mechanism. But the luxury that we had with WPA2 of just being able to connect any device, I think it still remains a challenge, and ultimately I think needs standards-based intervention to solve.
So this is a problem we haven't really figured out how to gracefully do, and I've seen some features around this, and it sounds like some of them might be doing more of a portal, a registration experience, and some of them are doing something else where they're actually using WPA2, but there's nothing graceful yet.
Yeah, no, not how it currently exists in WPA2.
Oh. So, okay, well, our life is going to be challenging these next several months or year or two. But I wanted to thank you guys. I know we're just a minute past time here. So thank you, Keith, for letting us have this conversation. Thank you, guys.